For years, Airbnb wasn't just a travel app, it was a belief. A belief that hotels were outdated, that staying with strangers was safer than corporations, and that technology could turn anyone into a host, anyone into a traveler, and any spare room into income. It promised freedom, affordability, and authenticity in a world tired of sterile hotel rooms. But in 2025, something unsettling happened. Millions of Americans simply stopped booking. Airbnb began losing the one thing it could never afford to lose: trust. But before I tell you how that empire came crashing down, make sure you like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep making these deep dive documentaries for you. Chapter 1: The idea that terrified hotels. Airbnb did not begin as a billion-dollar tech company with venture capital backing and global ambition. It began as a last-ditch survival tactic during the 2008 financial crisis. In San Francisco, 3 roommates struggling to afford rent inflated air mattresses in their living room and offered strangers a place to sleep during a conference. The idea was crude, uncomfortable, and risky, but it was cheap. That single factor mattered more than anything else. In a moment when millions of Americans were cutting back, losing jobs, and rethinking travel entirely, Airbnb didn't sell luxury. It sold relief. Hotels, by contrast, were rigid and expensive. They charged fixed rates, enforced rules, and felt detached from real life. Airbnb felt human. Staying in someone's apartment wasn't just cheaper, it felt personal, improvised, and oddly intimate. This emotional difference gave Airbnb something far more powerful than technology: timing. Within just a few years, the platform crossed 1 million bookings, growing faster than airlines and traditional travel agencies. The hotel industry wasn't afraid because Airbnb was better. It was afraid because Airbnb changed expectations. Chapter 2: From Startup to Cultural Revolution. By the early 2000s, Airbnb had moved far beyond desperation economics. It had become a cultural movement. Venture capital flooded in at a pace that shocked even Silicon Valley insiders. First tens of millions, then over $1 billion in funding. Cities around the world began reshaping themselves around short-term rentals. Entire apartment buildings quietly converted into Airbnb-only properties. During major global events, like the 2014 World Cup in Brazil, Airbnb hosted more travelers than entire hotel districts combined. At its peak, Airbnb didn't just compete with hotels on price, it competed on narrative. Live like a local wasn't marketing, it was identity. Guests felt they were stepping into real lives, real neighborhoods, and real cultures rather than commercial zones. Most importantly, Airbnb was dramatically cheaper. In many cities, it cost 40 to 60% less than a hotel. There were no cleaning fees worth mentioning, no surprise charges, and no feeling of being monitored. That combination made Airbnb feel unbeatable. But dominance has a hidden danger: complacency. Chapter 3: The first cracks no one took seriously. Airbnb did not collapse suddenly. It began to fracture slowly, quietly, and unevenly. Around 2021, subtle frustrations started appearing in reviews, forums, and social media posts. Complaints that didn't seem fatal on their own, but added up over time. The first real warning sign was the cleaning fee. Guests noticed that cleaning charges were increasing rapidly, sometimes reaching hundreds of dollars. At the same time, hosts were requiring guests to clean the property themselves, wash towels, strip beds, vacuum floors, and take out trash. What Airbnb underestimated was how much tolerance was being subsidized by savings. When prices were dramatically lower than hotels, guests were willing to forgive inconvenience and even mild discomfort. Risk felt acceptable because the reward was obvious. But as prices crept upward, the psychological equation changed. The same inconveniences that once felt quirky now felt insulting. What had been framed as community began to feel like unpaid labor. Airbnb didn't recognize this shift because its internal metrics still showed bookings, but it failed to measure emotional fatigue. By the time complaints became loud, tolerance had already vanished. Airbnb tracked transactions, not trust, and trust was quietly draining away long before revenue reflected it. From a psychological perspective, this was devastating. Consumers are willing to pay more when value increases, but they react aggressively when they feel exploited. Airbnb's original promise, informal, friendly, affordable, was being replaced with something colder and more transactional. What made this worse was inconsistency. One Airbnb stay could be perfect. The platform that once symbolized freedom now felt unpredictable. Chapter 4. When prices stopped making sense. For years, Airbnb listings looked deceptively affordable. $120 per night, $140 per night, $160 per night. But at checkout, those numbers often doubled or tripled. Service fees, cleaning fees, management fees, and miscellaneous charges appeared only at the final step. This wasn't just higher pricing, it was price shock. Travelers felt ambushed, and once trust is broken at checkout, it rarely returns. At the same time, house rules grew increasingly extreme. Guests encountered pages-long rulebooks dictating shower duration, air conditioning limits, trash schedules. Some rules were revealed only after booking, trapping guests in agreements they never consented to. Airbnb's pricing problem wasn't just about cost. It was about expectation management. Hotels trained customers to expect a final price up front. Airbnb trained customers to expect discovery. Each additional fee felt like a betrayal because it violated the mental contract the platform had created years earlier. From Airbnb's perspective, fees made sense, but from the guest's perspective, the experience felt deliberately opaque. Airbnb didn't fail to price competitively. It failed to communicate honestly. And in consumer psychology, perceived deception damages trust faster than outright expense. Once travelers began mentally budgeting Airbnb stays as potentially expensive, the platform lost its core advantage. And no algorithm can recover what the checkout page destroys. Airbnb had quietly reversed its relationship with customers. Guests were no longer paying for rest. They were paying for responsibility. The platform shifted the burden of hospitality from host to traveler and did it without acknowledging the emotional cost. Chapter 5. Amateur hosts and professional damage. As Airbnb expanded globally, quality control collapsed. Hundreds of thousands of new hosts joined the platform, many with no understanding of hospitality standards. The result was wildly inconsistent experiences that eroded confidence. Guests reported rude communication, ignored maintenance issues, last-minute cancellations, and hosts entering properties without notice. Some cases crossed into safety concerns: broken locks, unsafe flooring, hidden cameras, and unresponsive customer support during emergencies. The deeper issue was structural. Airbnb is a two-sided marketplace, which means enforcing strict standards on hosts, shrinking supply. Removing bad hosts might improve experience, but it threatens growth. And growth had become Airbnb's primary objective. This created a dangerous incentive imbalance. Guests needed consistency, hosts wanted autonomy, Airbnb chose scale. And once that decision was made, service quality could only decline. Airbnb wasn't unaware of bad experiences. It was constrained by its own business model from fixing them aggressively. Hotels solved this problem through hierarchy and training, and hoped ratings would regulate behavior. They didn't. Hotels exist for one reason: risk management. Airbnb, by contrast, was amplifying risk, and risk tolerance is directly tied to price. When Airbnb was cheap, people accepted uncertainty. When prices rose, that tolerance disappeared. By 2023, a common phrase appeared repeatedly in reviews and social media: every Airbnb stay feels like a gamble. Once travel feels like rolling dice, the system has already failed. Chapter 6. The trust collapse. Trust does not collapse because of one scandal. It collapses through repetition, through dozens of small disappointments that quietly teach users to expect less while paying more. Airbnb didn't just raise prices, it lowered perceived value. Travelers began comparing total costs rather than nightly rates. A 3-night Airbnb stay often reached $650 to $700. A comparable 4-star hotel, $400. With breakfast, housekeeping, security, Airbnb occupied the most dangerous position in business. The most expensive option with the least reliability. Consumers didn't argue. They didn't organize protests. They simply changed behavior. Millions of Americans stopped booking not because Airbnb told them to leave, but because Airbnb gave them no reason to stay. Chapter 7, 2025, When Everything Fell Apart. By 2025, every negative force converged at once. Bookings dropped sharply. Host incomes collapsed. Entire neighborhoods listed dozens of short-term rentals for sale simultaneously, flooding housing markets. In many regions, properties that once ran at 85 to 95% occupancy sat dark and empty. Owners who had earned 6 figures annually were now selling at losses of $50,000 to $150,000. Governments responded aggressively. Cities like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and San Diego imposed strict regulations or outright bans. Short-term rentals were increasingly seen as housing disruptors rather than tourism tools. At the same time, Airbnb changed its fee structure, shifting costs from guests to hosts. Hosts raised prices to compensate. Guests left even faster. The growth flywheel reversed into a death spiral. Chapter 8. The Hotel Comeback. No one expected. Airbnb's decline didn't create space for another tech disruptor. It resurrected the hotel industry. Hotels didn't innovate aggressively. They stayed consistent. Hotels offered certainty, transparent pricing, daily housekeeping, professional security, loyalty programs, free breakfast, no surprises, no negotiations. In consumer psychology, stability beats novelty when fatigue sets in. Hotels understood this. While Airbnb added friction, hotels removed it. While Airbnb asked guests to serve themselves, hotels offered service. Chapter 9. What Airbnb really lost. Airbnb did not fail because technology evolved. It failed because it forgot why people trusted it in the first place. It was never about homes. It was about emotional safety, about feeling welcomed rather than managed. Airbnb rose by listening to travelers and declined when growth mattered more than experience. It kept selling adventure while users were seeking rest. And by the time leadership acknowledged the shift, the market had already moved on. Airbnb once redefined travel by offering freedom, affordability, and authenticity. But when difference turned into risk and affordability disappeared, millions of Americans chose stability instead. Hotels didn't win by innovating faster. They won by remaining predictable. And if Airbnb ever wants to recover, it will be through rebuilding trust. If you want to see how another iconic brand lost its way, watch my previous documentary on Jaguar's downfall. And as always, like, subscribe, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.